So, question one, how am I doing? I think I'm doing okay. I think the beginning was probably a little bit more difficult for all of us than it is right now. Um, so, COVID, originally, when it started, I was already transferring from my first university, and I knew that I was going to transfer someplace else. And I was supposed to take an internship during the fall semester that would have sort of let me have time to figure everything out. But because of COVID, that internship opportunity was lost. So I sort of had to scramble to figure out where I wanted to go and what I wanted to major in and stuff like that. So that was probably the biggest way that it impacted my life. That and having to sort of like suddenly say goodbye to all of my friends at my old university um, was really difficult because I expected to have a lot longer of a time than I actually did to say goodbye. And there was a lot of people who didn't even know that like I wasn't coming back for the next semester in the next couple of years. So that was the most difficult part of the beginning of the pandemic. But I think that now I've sort of adjusted to life with COVID, as we all have, I hope. Question number two, were there any interesting or surprising things that you learned about public health crisis communication from this week's module? So the two main articles that I'm going to be talking about are the effective communication and from Twitter to the megaphone. I thought that the first article that I mentioned was really interesting in terms of how they sort of instructed people to talk about crisis communication, where they were talking about being like very empathetic and very like open with your communication, because I think that at the beginning of the pandemic that absolutely wasn't going on at all. I think that communication in terms of what the current administration was telling the people wasn't great, and I think that that was not a good idea, because I think that that made the pandemic worse than it might have been if we had known a couple of months earlier that it was going to be a big threat. Even if it was just a wild prediction, I think that telling everybody that it's not going to be a big deal, it's not going to be a big deal, it's not going to be a big deal, and then all of a sudden like shutting everything down in one weekend was a really big adjustment. And I feel like a better way to do it was to be more empathetic and more communicative in terms of telling people what's going on. And then the from Twitter to the megaphone, I thought that that was really interesting how they were talking about like sort of the advent of using text messages to communicate with people and using like messaging systems to tell people what was going on, because that's something that we still do now, and that's not really evolved in terms of like how we communicate, because the text messages that we get from like UNLV or from any sort of crisis thing are typically very short and very like, here's exactly what you need to know. So I thought that was really interesting how once we got down how we wanted to communicate with people during a crisis, that's sort of what we stuck to. How well do you think your local community has handled their crisis communication? I live in Vegas, so I'm going to be focusing more on UNLV. I think that UNLV handled it pretty well. I feel like they've been pretty good about communicating to students like what they plan to do or what they think they want to do, and also giving students the option to do online classes or in-person classes or live on campus or not live on campus. And so I think that the way that they've handled that has been pretty good. What channels are you receiving most of your information about the outbreak from? Probably a lot of like Instagram and TikTok, honestly, especially at the beginning, because nobody really knew what was going on. And then I also just sort of check BBC and other news outlets for real information, and then I'll watch interviews with some of the top doctors. Are you encountering any issues or relational turbulence about misinformation? Not really. I think that most of my family has been pretty good about making sure that they wear their masks and getting their vaccines when they're eligible for them. And I think that the most I've encountered is people in public who have been weird about putting their mask on. Have you taken part in or been motivated by any social media trends relating to the COVID-19 outbreak? I don't know if it's inspired by the COVID-19 outbreak, but I definitely think that I became more socially aware during the COVID-19 pandemic, just because of all of the things that have been happening on social media and a lot of the things that social media has been able to show us about the way that certain groups of people are treated in America, that I think I was aware of beforehand, but I wasn't able to see firsthand. And I think that with social media now becoming such a powerful tool for communication and change, I've really been able to see the things that are going on in America and know how to change them. So I don't know if that counts like a COVID trend, and I don't think it should be, because it's definitely more activism. But that's the biggest thing that I think that I've participated in.